$10 million Bitcoin predictions are now going mainstream. But almost nobody understands what actually triggers that big move, because Bitcoin doesn't move like stocks, and it sure as hell doesn't move like gold. It moves when the supply gets locked. That's what happens. And it comes down to one number: control of the supply.
For our company, if we were to ever get to 5% of the network's going to be at least $1 million a coin. If we were to go beyond it, it's going to 10 million a coin. So when we get to 7% of the network, if we do, and Bitcoin is $10 million a coin, and if BlackRock keeps up with us, that means 85% of the network, right? And you're going to be talking about $200 trillion. So you're going to have $170 trillion that will flow to the individuals. So they're not exactly getting crowded out, right? If anything, what you've got is the corporations are all engines turning the flywheel of the Bitcoin economy.
So he just straight up said Bitcoin's heading to a $200 trillion market cap. That's not hype. That's capital absorbing supply in real time. And when demand overwhelms a fixed supply asset, the price doesn't move slowly. It reprices. You feel me? Now, can you see 10 million per coin happening by the time Saylor has 7.5% of the supply? Let me know, because he's fast approaching that number now at over 760,000 Bitcoin. But most people think 100,000 is the story when it's not. $10 million Bitcoin is now being openly discussed, and almost nobody understands what's actually happening. Here's what just changed. Michael Saylor just explained how Bitcoin reaches 10 million per coin. It comes down to one thing: ownership of the network. If institutions control enough of the supply, price doesn't rise slowly, it reprices. At the same time, Samson Mow is calling for $10 million Bitcoin and even dollar sat parity. Let that one sink in. One Bitcoin is equivalent to 100 million sats, Satoshis. And if one sat equals $1, that's $100 million per Bitcoin. And this isn't coming from some random voices. Even billionaire Tim Draper is calling for multi-million-dollar Bitcoin as adoption continues to accelerate. So this isn't hype, it is convergence. Now we look at the data. Public companies now hold 1.15 to 1.2 million BTC, with Saylor having the vast majority. That's roughly 6% of the total supply. One company dominates, Strategy holds 762,099, nearly 2/3 of all the corporate Bitcoin holdings. And if we zoom out even further, corporates, ETFs, governments, and institutional holdings exceed 4 million BTC. That's over 20% of the total supply already spoken for and growing fast. This is the part most people still don't understand. The demand isn't retail anymore. It's capital markets. Every dollar raise, every ETF inflow, every corporate treasury allocation gets converted into BTC, and then it gets locked away. Now combine that with reality. Bitcoin has a fixed supply of 21 million. No central bank, no dilution, and no way to increase production. So what happens when trillions of dollars begin competing for a rapidly shrinking pool of available Bitcoin? Price doesn't move gradually, it jumps violently. This is why Bitcoin doesn't behave like gold or stocks. It behaves like a supply shock asset. And the higher it goes, the more capital it attracts, which drives the price even higher. There's the reflective loop. That's how you go from 100,000 Bitcoin to 500,000 to 1 million to $10 million per Bitcoin and beyond. Because at that point, Bitcoin isn't competing with risk assets anymore. It becomes the base layer, a global reserve network, a monetary standard, and of course, not everyone sees it. Peter Schiff is still calling Bitcoin a fraud, still saying it goes to zero, but he's still thinking in the old system. Bitcoin isn't a company. It's not a stock. It's not even just a commodity. It's a network absorbing global capital in real time, while most people are still debating whether 100,000 is too high. By the time consensus catches up, the move will already be over. So the real question isn't, can Bitcoin reach $10 million. It is what happens when the world realizes there isn't enough Bitcoin to go around. And that's my question for you today. Let me know in the comments below. I'm a Bitcoin maxi, but get the frick out of here with the hopium. The world debt's roughly 350 trillion, while Bitcoin at 100 million per coin would be roughly 2 quadrillion, around 6 times larger. My response, market cap doesn't account for illiquid supply. Try pricing Bitcoin when nobody is selling. This person wrote, most people think 100,000 is the story. It's not. The real shift is the ownership. As capital markets absorb supply and lock it away, Bitcoin stops trading like an asset and starts repricing like a scarce network. This guy gets it. I wrote exactly. Once supply gets locked, the price doesn't trade, it gaps. Macro Trader wrote, an interesting question is, what will you be able to buy with $1 at the time Bitcoin values at 10 million per coin USD, which is a fair question. I wrote $10 million Bitcoin doesn't require hyperinflation. It can come from capital repricing into a fixed supply asset. Gold is roughly 36 trillion market cap. Global assets are hundreds of trillions. Total addressable market north of 800, 900 trillion. So if a fraction reallocates, Bitcoin rises in real terms, not just nominal. Well, I hope the world realizes soon supply ends are limited. People won't understand before we reach 10 million. And I think you're right, Oracle. 95% of the people do not understand fractional reserve system. 90% of the money is digital, and so yes, Bitcoin is actually safer than a bank. Take that, JP Morgan. I have been saying $1 a sat for a long time. You sure have. And that would, insinuate $100 million per coin for the biddy. $1 sat, imagine that. Absolutely. Send it. US dollar has lost 15% of the purchasing power from 2009. Bitcoin has appreciated 250 million %. Choose wisely, young praying mantis. And that's not hype from Saylor, by the way. That's capital absorbing supply in real time. And when demand overwhelms a fixed supply asset, the price doesn't move slowly, it reprices. Now, Samson Mow.
As Bitcoin becomes the new world reserve asset, the price will go up. It'll go to 1 million. It'll go to 10, and then it'll reach dollar sat parity. And probably before that happens, we hit a terminus point where, you stop pricing things in dollars because it doesn't make sense anymore. And there's tons of historical examples of this, right? Like fast failure of fiat currencies is the norm. It's not the exception. Look at the German mark, right? That's fast fail. Every fiat currency fast fails. It doesn't fail over 50 to 100 years, except for maybe the dollar. It's failed over 100 years, but it's coming to a close.
Can you guys see Bitcoin becoming a world global reserve currency? Because that's 10 million to 100 million per coin. That would be a reality by the time that happens. And he just referenced dollar sat parity, again, $100 million per Bitcoin. And he's not the only influencer talking this. We also have Tim Draper, the billionaire venture capitalist. Check it out.
Not only is Bitcoin against the dollar a really good bet, but you're seeing the dollar fall as fast as you're seeing Bitcoin grow. And that combination is going to, it'll hit 250,000, but it's going to hit 1 million. It's going to hit 10 million on its way to where the dollar is no longer accepted, no longer worth it, and Bitcoin is the one source of store of value and currency for the world eventually.
And here's what Draper had to say on an X post. He talks about how he first bought Bitcoins at $4 and then lost everything on Mt. Gox, then bought back in a U.S. Marshals auction and paid over market at $632. People thought I was crazy, he says, when Bitcoin was at $180 in 2014. And I predicted $10,000 per coin by 2017. 3 years to the day later, it hit exactly that. In fact, in 2017, it shot up to 20,000. Now, my next prediction thwarted by a misguided administration, but now we're back on track. And he says, I'm calling for $250,000 Bitcoin in 6 months and all the way up from there. And he even says maybe 10 million per coin before Bitcoin eclipses the use of the dollar. The Bitcoin network keeps growing while the dollar keeps shrinking. So let me know if you agree or disagree with billionaire venture capitalist Tim Draper. And it's not only the insiders talking about Bitcoin going to millions or 10 million per coin. We also have the major institutions. For example, Van Eck has said by 2050, Bitcoin becomes a reserve asset that is used in global trade and held by global central banks at a 2% weight. In that model, we arrive at a $3 million price target for Bitcoin. Into the millions over the medium term is a high conviction call. Check it out.
We have a model that assumes that by 2050, this is very long term, that Bitcoin becomes a reserve asset that's used in global trade and held by global central banks at a very modest 2% weight. And in that model, we arrive at a $3 million price target for Bitcoin. Now, that sounds, extreme, but that's a 16% compound annual growth rate for a couple decades. That's not really that extreme. So into the millions over the medium term is high conviction.
Now, keep in mind, that's a $3 million base case from traditional finance, not crypto, but Wall Street. Bitcoin is up forever, like the Wu-Tang. That would make the price of one Bitcoin at over $1 billion. Well, now we're talking. Seriously, fam. Could you imagine $10 a sat? Yeah, $10 billion per coin. Send it. Trolls predicting Bitcoin going to zero. Terrence Howard. Supply and demand sets the price and supply is dwindling. So fuck around, find out. But the longs know the dealio. JB, they are doing some kind of QE ATM since the QT stopped December. Do you think they'll start printing en masse due to war? Abso-fucking-lutely. I do think pretty little money printer will go burr, and it's going to be a catalyst to send Bitcoin parabolic. Absolutely, because every time they turn on the money printers, Bitcoin gains purchasing power against the dollar, while the dollar, loses its purchasing power. The Bitcoin network rival Swift doesn't have all the middlemen. It is used to provide liquidity, rapid transactions globally, and irrefutable and unhackable. Precisely. Oh, yeah, and another asset manager calling for a crazy prediction besides Van Eck, we have Fidelity. Jurrien Timmer, he's the one who said $1 billion per coin by 2038. I'm sure you've seen that prediction flowing out there. So the asset managers are very bullish. The ETF folks, very bullish. The Bitcoin IBIT BlackRock ETF, most successful ETF in history. Way more outperforming than anything in comparison, including the gold ETF. And what's crazy, it only launched 2 years ago, back in January of 2024, which is pretty wild. Not everyone agrees with $10 million per coin for Bitcoin, especially the skeptics like Peter Schiff. And let me give you an example. Michael Saylor's resurface claims of Bitcoin rising to 10 million per coin sparked backlash. Peter Schiff slams the founder as delusional. That's right. Peter Schiff had some very choice words for Saylor, and I'll read you some of what he has written here. He did write, MSTR's entire business model is fraud. He also says, I believe MSTR will eventually go bankrupt. Let's go. Bitcoin therapist chimed in, yes, Peter, regardless if Bitcoin goes to 1 million, MSTR is going to go bankrupt, especially since this is their entire balance sheet. That makes complete sense. Absolute genius. Great call, sir. Need to subscribe to your pod after hearing this one. No one better, which is quite hilarious. When he was on Patrick Bet-David's podcast, he said, I don't think Bitcoin has any real value at all. I think it's just a speculative mania. Ultimately, I think MSTR goes bankrupt. I think eventually Bitcoin is going to crash and the creditors are going to end up with the company. Now, this ain't the first time we have heard this. Even more recently, Terrence Howard has come out saying Bitcoin is going to die. We've heard Dan Pena, it's going to zero. We've heard all the skeptics. We've heard the lamestream media announce Bitcoin dead, hundreds and hundreds of times over the years. So this is really nothing new. Of Saylor, he says when we get to 5% of the network, Bitcoin's at $1 million per coin. And at 7.5%, that's how we reach 10 million per coin. And I remind you, he's well on his way to reaching some of these targets, now at over 760,000 of the Bitcoin. He also says we really represent a motor and we are powering the network up. We're driving the price of Bitcoin up from 10,000, 100,000, or a million to 10 million. And he's right. He's created a fine-tuned Bitcoin ecosystem with all of these products designed to raise capital. I call it the infinite money glitch. And then he just purchases Bitcoin, typically raises billions per week and buys 5 times the daily issuance right now. And that's a single entity. And that's why it is truly mind-boggling to hear skeptics like Peter Schiff, share their nonsense, if you know what I'm saying. Also, another interesting headline, God and Bitcoin. Why some Christians are going all in on cryptocurrency. That's because Bitcoin is God hacking humanity. Let me know if you agree with that. And Michael Saylor just recently tweeted, this was yesterday, time to put the laser eyes back on. And that's right. If you're bullish, you got to put your laser eyes on as well. Now check this. The Fed will inject $14 billion. Fed Chair Jay Powell, money printer go brr, couldn't be more bullish for Bitcoin. Here we have President Trump expected to sign the Clarity Act. A flight is about to begin for Bitcoin and altcoins. Buckle up. And he also had some very bullish things more recently to share about Bitcoin, quoting him here. So many people now, they want to pay you in crypto. They want to pay you in Bitcoin. And we have to be the top of it. And I hope we do make the United States the top of it because we have the strategic Bitcoin reserve in which he signed that executive order. Now it's just a matter of them doing something, with it. But could you anticipate the supply shock? Let me know. Another bullish individual, we got crypto billionaire Arthur Hayes predicting 500 to 750,000 by the end of 2026, which means before the end of this year. He explains we got the Trump administration plus the Iran conflict plus the Fed easing equals, printing mad dollars, which just sends, Bitcoin parabolic, of course. Goldman Sachs says Bitcoin may have already hit its cycle bottom, and that bottom would have been then 59.9. The current bottom is in. Let me know if you agree or disagree with that. This analyst here, I believe this toward Demeester, he says Bitcoin will hit 500,000 and be the world's reserve currency. And he said this 11 years ago when Bitcoin was $100. So shout out to the OGs. He says 3,000 Bitcoin and you're a billionaire, but want to know the caveat or the silver lining? I think it'll be a lot less than 3,000 Bitcoin to become a billionaire, if you know what I mean. Of course, we got Thomas Lee, always bullish on Bitcoin as well, suggesting a rise to $250,000. So between Michael Saylor continuing to stack sats at unprecedented levels via strategy, and all the places he is able to raise money from his STRC product, of course, MSTR, the traditional stock, STRK, the entire streamlined ecosystem, I believe he will get to that 7.5% mark, which will send Bitcoin to 10 million per coin and beyond. But I want to know your thoughts on that. And do you think this will happen? And by when can you see a $10 million Bitcoin price? And also, as Samson Mow says, we can see dollar stat parity, suggesting 100 million per coin. When can you see this reality? And of course, Tim Draper, bullish with his $10 million thesis, as well as Van Eck suggesting $3 million price target for Bitcoin, millions over the medium term. And this is a high conviction call because, again, this is the base case based on 2% allocation. What happens if it's 4, 6, 8, 10%? Then we just multiply to 15 million per coin. And or do you agree with the haters, such as Peter Schiff, that Bitcoin is effectively going to go to zero, MSTR is a fraud, and is going to crash? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments right down below. Voltaire, a famous French philosopher, stated circa 1720, all fiat eventually returns to its original intrinsic value. Zero. They announced it dead at $1, at $10, $100, $1,000, and $100,000. Why should we listen to them now? And that's a brilliant point. That should be quote of the day or comment of the day right there, because it's so true. The same folks who doubted Bitcoin at $1 or $10 or 100 or 1,000 or 100,000, same concept happening today. at Bitcoin at 60, 70,000. I heard it at 120,000, and we'll never stop hearing the end of it because not everyone has the vision, because not everyone understands Bitcoin. It's about the supply. There's a finite limited supply. We didn't even touch upon the fact there's 4 or 5 million Bitcoin lost, stagnated, that will never move ever again. Satoshi has 1.1 million single-handedly, spread across multiple wallets, of course, and then the rest of the lost Bitcoin, and it just continues to dwindle in supply each and every year. Nobody can change that. No corrupt government, Epstein's clients, nobody. And that makes it the hardest asset known to mankind. And people will always doubt it because they don't understand it. And that's why we're here.